They were planning to steal my house. My hands shook. My groceries dropped. I couldn't believe my eyes. But they had no idea what I was about to do next. I was standing in the doorway of my own home in February 2023, staring at my son Kevin, his wife Amanda, and a realtor sitting around my kitchen table discussing renovations and room assignments as if I didn't exist. The house I'd saved for in secret, bought with my own money, was being divided up like I was already dead. I'm Diane Thompson, and I'm 67 years old. I'm here in my cozy living room in my townhouse in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by women who've become my chosen family, women who understand what it means to finally put yourself first after decades of being everyone else's solution. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while you listen to my story. Are you having your evening tea, maybe thinking about your own boundaries with family, or just taking a quiet moment for yourself? Hit that like button, because each like is so important to help my voice reach other women who might be drowning in their family's expectations. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because no woman should have to learn the devastating difference between helping and being exploited alone. You see, I'm sitting here now in a home where every decision is mine, every room reflects my choices, and every door stays locked to people who see my love as weakness. But 2 years ago, I was still believing that being a good mother meant accepting whatever my adult son decided was best for me, even when those decisions included taking over the one thing I'd ever bought just for myself. What Kevin and Amanda didn't know when they were measuring my living room for their furniture was that 14 years of being their unpaid babysitter had finally taught me the difference between love and exploitation. I thought family meant sacrifice without limits. I was about to learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is finally say no. I was born Diane Louise Miller in 1956 in Charlotte, North Carolina, where my mother taught me that a woman's highest calling was serving her family's needs before her own. I married Robert Thompson in 1978, and we moved to Asheville, where he worked as a park ranger in the Blue Ridge Mountains while I taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. Those early years were filled with hiking trails, community festivals, and the kind of mountain life where neighbors knew each other's names and children played safely until dark. Robert and I tried for years to have children, enduring 2 miscarriages before Kevin was finally born in 1987. He was our miracle baby, and perhaps that's where I learned to treat him like he could do no wrong. I taught school for 32 years, retiring in 2008 with a modest pension and savings that Robert and I had carefully accumulated for our golden years. We planned to travel, maybe buy a small RV, and see the national parks Robert had worked in during his career, but life had different plans for us. Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack in 2009, when Kevin was 22. Instead of stepping up to support his grieving mother, Kevin seemed to expect that I would now have even more time and resources to devote to his needs. By then, he'd already developed a pattern of calling me whenever he needed money, emotional support, or someone to solve his problems. Kevin married Amanda in 2011, and their first child, my granddaughter Sophie, was born in 2010. That's when my real job as the family's unpaid servant began. "Mom, we can't afford daycare on Amanda's salary," Kevin would say, "and you're retired now, so you have the time." What started as occasional babysitting became full-time grandparent duty while Kevin and Amanda built their careers. By 2012, when baby Jake arrived, I was watching both children 4 days a week, doing their laundry, cooking their meals, and even cleaning their house because it's just easier for you to do it while you're there with the kids. Amanda worked as a dental hygienist and Kevin as a claims adjuster, but somehow their combined income of $60,000 never seemed sufficient for basic childcare or household help. The financial requests started small: help with a car payment here, assistance with childcare costs there. But by 2015, I was regularly writing checks for their mortgage when Kevin's commissions were low, their credit card bills when Amanda's shopping got out of hand, and their children's activities because the kids shouldn't suffer just because money is tight. "Mom, we'll pay you back when my next big commission comes in," Kevin would promise. But the commissions never came and the paybacks never materialized. Between 2012 and 2020, I gave them over $40,000 from my retirement savings, money that was supposed to fund my own security and independence. When Sophie started school in 2016, instead of reducing my responsibilities, Kevin and Amanda simply added homework supervision and after-school transportation to my duties. "The kids are so comfortable with you, Mom. It would be traumatic to put them in an after-school program." So I drove 20 minutes across town every day to pick them up, helped with homework, made dinner, and often didn't get home until 7 o'clock at night. My own retirement was being consumed by their convenience. I'd worked hard and saved diligently for peaceful golden years, but instead of traveling or pursuing hobbies, I was working harder than ever, without pay, without appreciation, and without any acknowledgement that I might have my own needs and desires. The breaking point began in 2020 when Amanda announced she wanted to go back to school for dental hygiene certification. "Mom, we're going to need you even more now," she said, as if my availability was simply a given. "I'll be in classes 3 days a week, and we can't afford additional childcare." At 64 years old, I was being volunteered to provide even more free labor while the parents focused on improving their earning potential. That's when I started secretly saving money in an account Kevin didn't know about. Every month, I'd deposit part of my Social Security check and teacher's pension into a separate savings account at a different bank. It took me 2 years, but by 2022, I had enough money saved to buy something I'd never had in my entire life, a home that belonged only to me. I found a small cottage 20 minutes outside Asheville, a peaceful place with a garden and a view of the mountains that Robert had loved so much. It was modest but perfect. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cozy kitchen, and most importantly, it was mine. I paid cash using $38,000 I'd saved, kept the purchase secret, and for the first time in my adult life, I had a space where I could breathe. But Kevin's sense of entitlement ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. In his mind, anything his mother owned was a family resource, and my little cottage was just another asset for him to claim when convenient. The first hint of trouble came in January 2023 when Kevin started asking unusually detailed questions about my new place. I'd been careful not to reveal that I owned it outright, simply telling the family I was renting a small place in the mountains to have some quiet time for myself. "Mom, this rental situation doesn't make financial sense," Kevin said during one of our weekly phone calls. "You're throwing money away on rent when you could be helping us save for a bigger house. Amanda and I have been talking, and we think you should move in with us. The kids need their grandmother close by, and it would solve everyone's housing problems. Move in with them." After 14 years of being their unpaid employee, they wanted to make the arrangement permanent and save money in the process. "Kevin, I need my own space right now. I'm not ready to give up my independence." His response revealed everything I needed to know about how he viewed my autonomy. "Mom, you're 66 years old. How much independence do you really need? Family should stick together, and it's not like you have other commitments." Other commitments. As if my desire for privacy and peace was just a selfish whim rather than a basic human need. Amanda was more direct during Sophie's 13th birthday party in February. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was cutting cake for 12 children. "Diane, this whole mountain retreat thing is getting expensive, and honestly, it's inconvenient for all of us. The kids miss having you available whenever they need you, and Kevin spends half his time driving up there to check on you." Check on me. Kevin had been driving to my cottage without invitation, showing up unannounced, and walking around the property like he was conducting some kind of inspection. I'd assumed he was being a caring son, but Amanda's words suggested something more calculating. "The house has good bones," he'd said after his last uninvited visit. "Great potential for expansion. You could easily add another bedroom and bathroom if you wanted to accommodate more people." At the time, I thought he was just making conversation. Now I realized he was planning. The real revelation came when I overheard a phone conversation between Kevin and Amanda while I was babysitting the kids one evening in February. They thought I was outside helping Jake with his bike, but I'd come inside to get Band-Aids and heard them talking in the kitchen. The realtor thinks we could add at least 600 square feet without any major structural changes, Amanda was saying. Sophie could have her own room, Jake could have his own space, and there'd still be room for a home office. They were discussing my house like it was their future renovation project. Mom won't like the idea at first, Kevin replied, but once she sees how much better it would be for everyone, she'll come around. She always does. She always does. Those words revealed how Kevin saw me, not as a person with my own will, but as someone who could be manipulated into accepting whatever he decided was best. What if she refuses? Amanda asked. I mean, she's been pretty stubborn about this independence thing lately. Independence thing. My desire for autonomy was just a phase they needed to manage until I returned to my proper role as their convenience. She won't refuse, Kevin said, with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by his mother. Besides, it makes perfect sense. She's rattling around in that house by herself, and we're cramped in this place with the kids getting bigger. It's a win-win situation. A win-win situation where I lost my independence and they gained free housing and continued free childcare. That conversation kept me awake for nights, realizing that my own son was planning to take over my home and genuinely believed he had the right to make that decision for me. I started paying closer attention to their visits and phone calls. Kevin would ask detailed questions about my neighbors, my daily routines, and my house maintenance needs. Amanda would make comments about how isolated I was and how worried they were about me living alone. They were building a case for why I shouldn't be allowed to live independently. What they didn't realize was that their manipulation was so transparent that it was actually strengthening my resolve to protect what I'd worked so hard to achieve. Every conversation where they questioned my judgment, every visit where they inspected my property, every suggestion that I was too old to live alone, only convinced me that my decision to create boundaries had been absolutely necessary. But I wasn't prepared for how bold they would become. On February 15th, 2023, I made my regular Tuesday trip to Food Lion in town, planning to spend a quiet evening cooking and reading. I'd bought ingredients for homemade soup and picked up a new novel I'd been wanting to read. When I pulled into my driveway with 3 bags of groceries, I noticed Kevin's Honda Civic parked behind my Toyota. That wasn't unusual. He still had a key from when I'd asked him to check on the house during a weekend trip to visit my sister in Charlotte. But there was also a white sedan I didn't recognize, and I could hear multiple voices coming from inside my house. Walking toward my front door with groceries in both arms, I could hear my son's voice clearly through the window. The living room could easily accommodate a sectional sofa, and if we opened up this wall to the kitchen, my blood turned to ice. They weren't just visiting my house, they were redesigning it. What I discovered when I walked through my own front door would either break me completely or teach me that some lines cannot be crossed, even by family. I stood frozen in my own doorway, grocery bags heavy in my arms, staring at a scene that felt like a home invasion disguised as a family meeting. My small kitchen table was covered with measuring tapes, floor plans, and real estate brochures. Kevin was pointing at my living room walls while explaining renovation ideas to a woman in a navy blazer who was taking notes on a tablet. Amanda sat at my table with a calculator and notebook, apparently running numbers. If we extend the back wall about 4 feet, we could add a master bedroom suite, Kevin was saying, his back to me as he gestured toward my garden. The kids are getting older and need more space, and Mom's getting to the age where she shouldn't be managing stairs anyway. Getting to the age, as if I was some invalid who couldn't manage my own single-story cottage. The woman in the blazer looked up first and saw me standing there. "Oh, you must be Mrs. Thompson. I'm Sarah Mitchell from Blue Ridge Property Solutions. Your son has been telling me about your family's expansion needs." Expansion needs. For my house. The room went dead silent as Kevin and Amanda turned to face me. Instead of embarrassment or apology, I saw irritation on their faces. Irritation that I'd interrupted their planning session for my own home. "Mom," Kevin said with forced brightness. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing some ideas for making better use of this space." Making better use. As if the way I lived in my own home was somehow wasteful or inadequate. I set my grocery bags on the counter with shaking hands, trying to process what I was seeing. The measuring tape, the floor plans, the casual way they were discussing modifications to my house as if I had no say in the matter. "Kevin, why is there a realtor in my house?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, still shocked by the audacity of what was happening. "Not a realtor exactly," Amanda interjected smoothly, not looking up from her calculations. "Sarah specializes in family housing solutions. We thought it might be helpful to get some professional input on how to optimize this space for everyone's needs." Everyone's needs. The phrase that revealed everything. In their minds, my cottage had already become a family property that needed to accommodate multiple generations, and my preferences were just one factor among many to consider. "The children are 11 and 13 now, and really need their own bedrooms," Amanda continued, as if I'd asked for her reasoning. "And frankly, Diane, this house is too big for one person. It makes more sense for the whole family to use it efficiently." Too big for one person. My modest two-bedroom cottage with 100 square feet was apparently too much space for me to occupy alone, but perfect for a family of 4 who had made no financial contribution to purchasing it. Sarah, the property consultant, was still taking notes, apparently unaware that she was documenting a hostile takeover rather than a family consultation. "The foundation is excellent for expansion," she said professionally. "With the right additions, you could easily accommodate a family of 4 while maintaining the cozy mountain feel." A family of 4. They weren't planning to visit my cottage or even share it. They were planning to take it over completely and redesign it for their needs while expecting me to be grateful for the privilege of living in whatever corner they assigned to me. "I didn't ask for a consultation," I said, my voice getting stronger. "This is my house. I bought it for myself." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth because I'd never had to assert ownership of my own property to my own family before. Kevin's expression shifted from forced cheer to the familiar manipulation I'd seen countless times when he wasn't getting his way. "Mom, we're just trying to help. You can't live alone forever, and this place is too isolated." "What if something happens to you?" "What if something happens?" was Kevin's favorite emotional manipulation. He'd been using my mortality as leverage for years, suggesting that any choice he disapproved of was evidence of my declining judgment or dangerous independence. "Besides," Amanda added, looking up from her calculator, "we've been thinking about this for months. The kids need stability, Kevin's job is secure, and we need more space. This arrangement would solve everyone's problems." Everyone's problems except mine, since no one had bothered to ask what I wanted. If you're feeling the violation and outrage of this moment with me, show your support, hit that like button, comment if you've ever had family members who treated your belongings as their property, and subscribe because sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who respect you least. "Months?" I repeated, the full scope of their planning becoming clear. "You've been planning to take over my house for months without asking me?" This wasn't an impulsive idea born from seeing my cottage. It was a calculated scheme they'd been developing while pretending to support my independence. "We're not taking over anything," Kevin said, with the patronizing tone he'd used since childhood when caught misbehaving. "We're talking about family living arrangements that make practical sense for everyone involved." Practical sense that somehow required me to give up my home and privacy. "The financial benefits alone make this worthwhile," Amanda continued, reading from notes she'd apparently prepared in advance. "You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or security, the kids would have their grandmother close by, and we'd all save money on housing costs. I wouldn't have to worry about anything because they would be making all the decisions." Sarah looked uncomfortable as the family tension became impossible to ignore. "Perhaps I should let you all discuss this privately," she said, starting to gather her materials. "I can prepare some preliminary estimates, and you can review them when you've had time to talk." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Sarah, I didn't hire you. I don't want estimates, and I'm not interested in any modifications to my house. Please leave my property immediately." Sarah practically ran for the door, clearly relieved to escape the family drama she'd inadvertently walked into. The door closed behind her, leaving me alone with my family and the devastating realization that they saw my home as their future project rather than my chosen sanctuary. "Now look what you've done," Kevin said, as if I was the one behaving inappropriately. "Sarah was doing us a favor by coming out here, and you've embarrassed all of us." But I was done being managed, manipulated, and made to feel unreasonable for wanting to live in my own house without interference. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Both of you. Get out of my house right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin and Amanda stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, clearly unprepared for direct resistance to their plans. "Mom, you're being emotional," Kevin said in the condescending tone he'd perfected over the years. "Let's sit down and talk about this rationally. We're family, and family works together to solve problems." Rationally, as if my anger at discovering strangers planning modifications to my home was an overreaction rather than a completely normal response. I said, "Get out." My voice was stronger now, fueled by years of suppressed frustration at being treated like my opinions didn't matter. "This is my house, and you are not welcome here right now." Amanda tried a different approach, gathering her calculator and notes while putting on her most reasonable voice. "Diane, I think you're misunderstanding what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to create a solution that benefits everyone, especially you. A solution that involved them getting a larger house for free while I lost my independence and privacy." "Amanda, the only solution I need is for people to respect my property and my choices. Neither of you asked my permission to bring a consultant into my house or make plans for renovations I never agreed to." Kevin stood up and walked to my front window, looking out at the garden as if he was already planning changes to the landscaping. "Mom, you're making this much harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the enemy." Acting like they were the enemy. When they'd literally brought a property consultant to my house without permission to plan modifications I'd never requested or approved. "Kevin, helping means offering support when it's asked for and accepting no as an answer. What you're doing is making decisions about my life without consulting me." "But that's just it," Amanda said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "You're not making good decisions for yourself. Living alone at your age, in an isolated house, without family nearby, it's not safe or practical. Not making good decisions, because choosing to live independently in a house I owned was somehow evidence of poor judgment. Amanda, I'm 67 years old, not 97. I'm perfectly capable of living alone, and this house is not isolated. I have neighbors, I have friends, and I have a security system. Security system that I was increasingly grateful for, given how little respect my own family had for my boundaries. Kevin turned from the window with the determined expression that meant he was about to deliver what he considered the final word on the subject. "Mom, whether you want to admit it or not, you need family. Sophie and Jake need their grandmother. We need more space. This house is the perfect solution for everyone, and fighting it just makes everything harder. Perfect solution for everyone except the person who owned the house and would lose her independence in the arrangement." But Kevin's certainty that he could simply declare what was best for me was the final straw. I walked to my front door and held it open, my hands shaking with adrenaline and determination. "Kevin, take your wife and leave my property. You are not welcome here until you understand that this is my home, not a family resource for you to claim when convenient." "Mom, you're making a huge mistake," Amanda said, gathering her purse and papers. "We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're trying to hurt you." Help that looked exactly like them getting what they wanted while I lost what I'd worked for. "The mistake I made was giving you a key to my house and trusting you to respect my boundaries," I replied, surprised by how clear and strong my voice sounded. "That mistake ends today." Kevin paused in the doorway, his expression shifting between anger and disbelief. "Fine. But don't call us when you realize you can't handle living alone and need family to take care of you." The threat was clear. Refuse to let them take over my house, and they would withdraw their support entirely. Kevin, I've been taking care of myself for 67 years. I think I can manage without your help. The sentence felt revolutionary coming out of my mouth. The first time I'd ever told my son that I didn't need him to solve my problems or manage my life. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of their scheme, measuring tapes, calculators, and floor plan sketches scattered across my table like the debris of a failed invasion. For an hour, I just stared at the mess and tried to process what had happened. Then I got angry. Really angry. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the full force of righteous fury at being taken for granted, manipulated, and treated like my home was community property rather than personal sanctuary. My first call was to a locksmith. I need all my locks changed today, I told him. It's an emergency. Within 4 hours, Kevin's key no longer worked on any of my doors. The physical sensation of turning a key that only I possessed felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. My second call was to a security company. I need cameras installed around my property, I explained. I want to know if anyone approaches my house without permission. By the end of the week, I had complete surveillance of my property and the peace of mind that came with knowing I'd never again be surprised by uninvited consultations about my future. What happened next would teach my family that love has limits and that some boundaries cannot be crossed without permanent consequences. The immediate aftermath of changing my locks created exactly the storm of outraged phone calls I'd expected. Kevin called first, barely 2 hours after discovering his key no longer worked. "Mom, what the hell is going on? I can't get into your house. Did you actually change the locks?" The indignation in his voice was remarkable. He was furious that I'd taken steps to secure my own property from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with access. "Yes, I changed the locks," I said calmly, sitting in my reading chair with a cup of tea. "After what happened today, I no longer feel comfortable giving anyone unrestricted access to my home." Unrestricted access that he'd been using to bring consultants and plan renovations without my knowledge or consent. "You can't be serious. I'm your son. What if there's an emergency?" Kevin's fallback manipulation, creating imaginary emergencies that supposedly required him to have access to whatever he wanted. "What if you fall and can't get to the phone?" "Kevin, I have a medical alert system, neighbors who check on me, and a security company that monitors my house. I don't need you to have a key anymore." The sentence felt liberating. The first time I'd ever told my son that I could manage my own safety without his oversight. Amanda's call came within the hour, and her approach was more calculated. "Diane, Kevin is really hurt by what you've done. He's been nothing but caring and supportive, and you're treating him like some kind of criminal." Caring and supportive like bringing property consultants to plan modifications to my house without asking. "Amanda, if Kevin is hurt, he should examine why he thought it was appropriate to bring strangers into my house to plan renovations I never requested." The clarity of that statement surprised me. I'd never been so direct about their boundary violations before. "You're being dramatic," she said, her voice taking on the sharp edge it got when she wasn't getting her way. "We were trying to solve a housing problem that affects the whole family. The kids need space, we need more room, and you need family nearby. Kevin's plan would have been perfect for everyone. Perfect for everyone except the person who owned the house and valued her independence. Amanda, Kevin's plan involved taking over my house without my consent. That's not solving a problem, that's creating one." But the phone calls were just the beginning. The security cameras I'd installed captured Kevin driving by my house twice that first week, slowing down to stare at the property as if he was conducting surveillance. On Thursday, he actually parked across the street for 20 minutes, apparently trying to figure out if I was home. When I called him about the drive-bys, his response was telling. "I was just checking to make sure you're okay, since you've made it clear you don't want family involved in your life anymore." Checking on me by lurking outside my house instead of calling like a normal person. "Kevin, if you want to know how I'm doing, you can call and ask." Driving by my house and parking across the street is not checking on me. It's surveillance, and it needs to stop. The real escalation came the following week when Kevin showed up at my door with Sophie and Jake in tow. I watched through my security monitor as he rang the doorbell repeatedly, then started knocking loudly while the kids stood behind him looking uncomfortable. "Grandma Diane!" Sophie called through the door. "It's us. Why won't you open the door?" Kevin was using my grandchildren as emotional leverage, bringing them to guilt me into letting him inside despite our boundary dispute. I opened the door, but left the security chain attached. "Hello, Sophie." "Hello, Jake. I'm always happy to see you both." The kids looked confused and a little scared by the tension they could feel, but didn't understand. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Kevin said through the small gap. "These are your grandchildren. Are you really going to keep them standing on your porch because you're angry at me?" "Kevin, you're welcome to bring the children for a visit any time you call ahead and ask permission. But you cannot use them to manipulate me into giving you access to my house." Using children as weapons in adult conflicts was a new low, even for Kevin. "I shouldn't have to ask permission to visit my own mother," he said, his voice getting louder. "This whole thing is insane. You're acting like I'm some kind of stranger instead of your son who loves you. Love that looked like planning to take over my house without asking, bringing consultants to make renovation plans without my consent, and now using my grandchildren to guilt me into submission. Kevin, love means respecting boundaries. What you're doing right now is the opposite of love." I closed the door, my heart breaking for Sophie and Jake, who were caught in the middle of their father's manipulation tactics. Over the next month, the pattern continued, Kevin alternating between angry demands for access and guilt trips involving the children. But each incident only strengthened my resolve to maintain the boundaries I'd finally learned to set. Living with clear boundaries for the first time in my adult life was both liberating and lonely. The constant anxiety of waiting for Kevin's next crisis or demand had disappeared, replaced by a peaceful quiet that I was still learning to enjoy. But the silence also meant accepting that my relationship with my grandchildren had become collateral damage in Kevin's war against my independence. For 3 months, I maintained my position. Kevin could visit if he called ahead and respected my boundaries, but he would not have unlimited access to my house or my life. He tested those boundaries regularly, showing up unannounced and then acting injured when I didn't let him in, bringing the children as emotional leverage and complaining to anyone who would listen that his mother had changed and become unreasonable. But something unexpected happened during those months of enforced distance. Without the constant stress of managing Kevin's crises and demands, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of family obligation. I started taking art classes at the community center, joined a hiking group for women over 60, and began volunteering at the local literacy program. The women I met through these activities were revelation to me. Many of them had similar stories. Adult children who'd expected unlimited availability, families who'd treated their mother's resources as community property, relatives who'd confused love with control. But unlike me, many of them had learned much earlier to set boundaries and protect their independence. The secret, my neighbor Janet told me over coffee one morning, is understanding that saying no to family exploitation isn't selfish. It's necessary for your survival. Janet was 71 and had moved to the mountains after her son tried to convince her to sell her house and move in with his family so they could keep an eye on her finances. Another woman in my hiking group, Carol, had been through something similar with her daughter. "They act like wanting your own space is evidence of mental decline," she told me during a break on the Blue Ridge Parkway Trail. "But there's nothing crazy about wanting to live in your own house without interference." For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by women who understood that independence wasn't selfish, that boundaries weren't mean, and that family relationships required mutual respect to be healthy. I started cooking meals just for myself, arranging furniture exactly how I liked it, and making decisions based on my preferences rather than other people's expectations. In May 2023, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put my cottage on the market. Not because Kevin had worn me down or because I couldn't afford to maintain it, but because I realized I wanted to move somewhere Kevin couldn't find me easily, somewhere I could start completely fresh without the constant pressure of his expectations and manipulations. The cottage sold quickly to a young couple from Charlotte who wanted a weekend retreat in the mountains. They loved the garden I'd planted and the peaceful atmosphere I'd created. When I accepted their offer for $45,000, $7,000 more than I'd paid, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Kevin's reaction to learning about the sale was explosive. "You sold the house? Mom, how could you do something so stupid? Where are you going to live? What about the kids?" The questions revealed his assumption that I couldn't make major life decisions without his approval or oversight. "I'm moving to Portland, Oregon," I told him during our last phone conversation before the move. "I've found a wonderful community there, and I'm looking forward to starting fresh." Portland was 2,400 miles from Asheville, far enough that Kevin couldn't simply show up at my door whenever he disagreed with my choices. "Portland? Mom, you don't know anyone in Portland. You can't just move across the country at 67. As if my age had somehow disqualified me from choosing where to live. "What about family? What about everything you're leaving behind?" "Kevin, I'm leaving behind a situation where my boundaries weren't respected and my independence was seen as a problem to be solved. I'm moving toward a life where I can make my own decisions without having to defend them." The house hunting process in Portland was entirely different from any housing decision I'd ever made. For the first time, I was choosing a home based purely on my own preferences, what I liked, what made me comfortable, what would make me happy. I worked with a realtor named Maria Santos, who treated me like an intelligent adult capable of making sound decisions. I found the perfect place in a community called Sunset Village, a development of townhouses designed for adults over 55 who wanted independence with optional community activities. My neighbors included retired teachers, businesswomen, nurses, and artists who'd all chosen to prioritize their own well-being after years of taking care of everyone else. My new townhouse was smaller than my cottage, but perfectly designed for one person who wanted to live comfortably and independently. I had a small garden plot, a sunny living room for reading, and most importantly, neighbors who understood that respecting boundaries was fundamental to healthy relationships. The women in my new community had stories similar to mine. Families who'd expected unlimited availability, adult children who'd treated their mother's resources as family property, relatives who'd confused love with control. But unlike me, many of them had learned much earlier to set boundaries and protect their independence. The hardest part, my neighbor Susan told me during our first coffee date, is accepting that some people will never respect your boundaries, even when those people are your own children. But once you accept that, you can decide how much access to give them based on their behavior, not their biology. Susan was 73 and had moved to Portland after her daughter tried to convince her that living alone was dangerous and that she should move into their basement apartment. "They called it helping," Susan laughed. "I called it house arrest." For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by women who validated my need for independence rather than questioning it. I started taking pottery classes, joined a book club, and discovered that I actually enjoyed cooking when I was only preparing meals for myself and people I'd chosen to spend time with. Kevin called less frequently after my move, and when he did, his tone had shifted from demanding to sulking. "I still don't understand why you had to move so far away," he would say. "The kids miss their grandmother, and it's not fair to them that you're punishing the whole family for something you think I did wrong." Something I think he did wrong. As if bringing a property consultant to my house without permission was a matter of interpretation rather than a clear boundary violation. "The kids are welcome to visit me here any time you want to bring them," I would respond. "And I'll visit Asheville when I choose to, not when I'm summoned." When I choose to. The most powerful phrase I'd ever learned. 6 months after my move, Kevin did bring Sophie and Jake to Portland for a long weekend. The visit was different from any family interaction we'd ever had. Instead of me scrambling to accommodate their needs, we made plans together based on what everyone wanted to do. The kids were fascinated by my new life and my community of independent women. "Grandma, I like your new house," 13-year-old Sophie told me as we toured my townhouse. "Everything looks exactly like you." Exactly like me. The teenager had immediately grasped what her father still struggled to understand. "Do you miss North Carolina?" 11-year-old Jake asked during our visit to the Portland Japanese garden. His question was thoughtful rather than accusatory, genuine curiosity about my choices rather than guilt about the distance. "I miss the mountains," I told him honestly, "but I don't miss feeling like I had to defend my right to live my own life. Here, nobody questions whether I should be allowed to make my own decisions." It's been 18 months since I moved to Portland, and I can honestly say these have been the most peaceful months of my adult life. I wake up every morning in a home where every decision is mine. Every room reflects my taste, and every choice I make is respected by the people around me. Kevin and I talk once a week now, and slowly, very slowly, he's beginning to understand that respect isn't optional in relationships, even family relationships. "Mom, I'm starting to realize that maybe I was too focused on what I thought you needed instead of listening to what you said you wanted," he told me during our last conversation. It's not a complete apology, and it doesn't undo the damage, but it's acknowledgement that my perspective matters. That's more progress than I'd ever expected from someone who'd spent 36 years believing his judgment was superior to mine. Amanda remains more resistant to the idea that I have the right to live independently, but she can't argue with the evidence of my improved well-being. During their visit last Christmas, she admitted, "You do seem happier here, Diane. I just wish it didn't have to be so far from family." "Amanda, I'm not far from family," I told her, gesturing toward my neighbor Carol, who'd stopped by with fresh cookies for the kids. "I'm far from people who don't respect my boundaries. There's a difference." If this story of reclaiming your life and choosing respect over familiarity touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments about a time when you had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your dignity, and subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because every woman deserves to learn that love without respect isn't love at all. I'm sitting here in my sunny living room in Portland, surrounded by women who understand that independence isn't selfish and that boundaries aren't walls. They're gates that let in people who respect what you've built. At 68 years old, I've learned that the most important house you can own is the one where you make all the decisions, where every room reflects your choices, and where love comes with respect attached. Remember, you can't control how family treats you, but you can control how much access they have to hurt you. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who respect you least. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show them that disrespect has consequences, even when those consequences include distance. The women I chose me back. That's the difference between real family and biological obligation. Real family is built on mutual respect, voluntary affection, and the understanding that love means wanting someone to be happy, even if their happiness doesn't include serving your convenience. My cottage in North Carolina was the first house I ever bought for myself. My townhouse in Portland is the first home where I learned I deserve to be respected.